Hi guys, welcome to Monday morning. Today's Tech Tip Talk is brought to you from the interior of my van. I wanted to make sure that I had a good connection, so I drove up to the freeway so that I could talk to you guys without breaking up. Hi everybody, it's Monday. Today we are going to talk to you guys about something that's near and dear to my heart, which is charts. Let me get Christina in here to join me. Just a moment. Let me let everybody gather together and join us. If you have questions for us, please put them in the comments. We love it when you guys ask questions, and we love it when you talk to us and let us know how you're doing too. There she is.
Hi, everybody.
Good morning, Christina.
Hi, Sarah.
How are you today?
I'm okay. It's like a gray day. It's humid, but raining, but cold, like all at the same time. And it suits. I'm ready for a day like that. I have work to do and don't need to be like drawn by the need and want to go outside and not be working.
I get that. It's sunny and hot here. It's always that. Summer Texas, humid.
Right.
So today, I suppose we need to introduce ourselves for those of you who are new here. Every Monday morning, we come on live to talk to you guys about technical things in knitting patterns. I'm Sarah Walworth. I'm a tech editor.
I'm Christina McGrath. I am a tech editor too. We tech edit knitting patterns, and that's where we have knowledge is in knitting.
So if you have questions about crochet, we may be able to point you in a correct direction. But for the most part, we deal with knitting patterns every day. Today, our topic is charts. And we have a lot of opinions about charts. And we also love to answer questions about them because we deal with them also on a daily basis in the knitting patterns that we edit. So if you guys have questions about knitting charts, in any question about them, throw them into the comments and we'd love to answer your questions about it. We did get a couple questions which we'll answer during our talk. So how do you want to start it, Christina?
Well, I was just thinking right now, it seems to me that used to be many years ago, a pattern had it was charted or it was written, and it wasn't often both.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when I first started knitting, there was hardly anything I knit that had a chart,
Mm-hmm.
and anything I had that had a chart, it wasn't written out. But now it seems like almost every pattern I tech edit, there's a chart.
Mm-hmm.
Not every single one, but many of them, So I think they're becoming more used, and in doing that, there's more misconceptions, maybe, So maybe just let's start with the basics. That
Maybe we need to ask everybody who loves to knit from charts. As a knitter,
right.
who loves to knit from charts and who prefers to work from written directions? Let us know where you stand on the issue. I will say that my experience as a knitting teacher is that it's about 50-50. So maybe 50% of my knitting students have never used a chart, don't know how to use a chart, not interested in using a chart. And the other 50% are avid chart users, like it makes their day to have a pattern with a chart in it. So that
There's
kind
one
of
for written directions.
one for written directions. I'm chart all the way chart.
Another one for written.
Mm-hmm. So maybe we can talk a little bit
Chart.
chart.
Either one.
Now, Kate is a crochet designer too, so there is a little bit more visual knowledge there with crochet too. Um, Either, but love charts.
Charts.
Charts. So again, even among just the people here today, it's about 50-50.
Mm.
So taking that into consideration, we had someone ask a question. Do you mind if I jump to the question, Christina? Is that
No,
okay?
go right ahead. We
So
should probably do that. Yeah.
let's jump to a question that Amy sent to me in a message that what are your opinions about including written directions and a chart in a pattern? So Christina just mentioned that it hasn't been that long that most knitting patterns didn't have both in them. This is
Well,
kind of
here,
a
so there's a comment, Sarah, and I was thinking about that. I wondered
mhm.
that who likes to have both as like a checks and balance. So,
Yes.
Amy says, I like both. Charts help when I don't understand the written directions.
Yeah.
Um,
And I
Also,
know,
there will be some patterns where there's a particular part of the pattern that's charted, but not everything. And
mhm.
so some people do well, say if it's a border, the body of the thing is in a chart and there's a border that's the same all the way through. Some people do well that they remember the border and they don't have to read anything and they can just do the chart and know what they're doing on the ends. And some people like to read it. And so I think some people do both. Some people like to have the written as kind of like a backup or to check, or the chart to make things clear. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I think it really has to do with your personal style and what your knitters are asking for, who your market is. Taking into consideration that 50% of the knitters, about, this is my scientific idea of how many there are, love charts. It may help to increase your market to the knitters if you do include charts for more complex patterning, such as lace or cabling or something like that. Now, here's the thing though, is that if you're not a chart knitter and you decide to write and include charts, you need to get that checked. Because I have found that some people, some of my clients who have never used a chart, try to come up with a chart and then they can make errors. So if you want to include charts and you don't know how, don't be afraid to ask a tech editor to help you out to build a chart for you that makes sense. I also find that some of my students really like to follow along on a chart while they put the written directions right
Yeah.
next to them. And that
Yeah.
helps them to learn how to use a chart. So take into consideration also that there may be more beginning chart knitters who've never used a chart who could benefit from having both written directions and charted directions. So that's my opinion. I love a pattern with charts. If it doesn't have a chart, I will actually go draw one. But that's how enthusiastic I am. How about you,
Well, and that
Christina?
well that brings us to why so many people now include both, right?
Hmm.
Like it's one more way to make our patterns
Hmm.
accessible to that many more people, to be appealing to that many more people. Because like we discovered, we have this sort of split. Some people like it and some people don't. Some people want the written and some people don't. So if you include both, you're that much more appealing and accessible to that many more people.
So
So I
let's.
think that's why people have started doing that so much, and so it's great. This might be a good time to say that the written instructions of
Hmm.
your pattern don't always necessarily need to match the chart. Like there might be a better way or a simpler way to write in the instructions. If there's a repeat, for example, or something like that, there might be a simpler way to write it in the instructions than it needs to be displayed on the chart. So as long as you get the right patterning, it can be,
Hmm.
you know, demonstrated, or what's the word?
Right.
Explained or whatever,
It can
whichever
be.
way best
Right.
suits that instruction format. So the chart way of writing it isn't always going to be the best way to write it out in the instructions. And as long as they're both correct, they don't have to like match exactly. You know what I mean?
I will say this though, and you mentioned the word accessibility. Um, I think it's incredibly important if you include a chart to include written directions because there are many knitters who visually cannot use a chart even if they blow it up or even if they use some kind of software, they need the written directions in order to be able to work your pattern. So it needs to be clear. If you cannot include written directions for whatever reason, the chart is gigantic or whatever, it needs to be clear on your pattern.
That it does not include
that
written
it does
instructions.
not include written directions, so
Right.
that someone who is visually impaired is not hampered in buying something that they can't use. So if at all possible, include written directions for your chart. That's
Yeah,
just
I
my two
agree.
cents.
No, I agree.
Just
I,
because I have friends who are blind and knitters, and they use the screen readers in order to be able to knit. So take that into consideration as you are designing your pattern and designing your layout.
yeah, it's a way to make your pattern accessible to everybody to offer both.
Mm-hmm.
And
So,
some people, adversely, like if you don't have a chart and there's a lot going on in every row of your pattern, and it's a lot, big thing, that's going
mm-hmm.
to be like how did you describe it? Like a wall of text,
A wall of
right?
text,
Like
yeah,
just letters and
right.
numbers, and it all
Mm-hmm.
looks like, oh my God, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
some people are great with that. They like to go thing by thing. And some people, like, if you see it in a chart, you're like, oh, it makes perfect sense. It's so easy. Da, 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 da. So it's just a way to make your patterns more accessible to everybody and please everyone, right? And make it easier for some people who are going to really struggle with whichever way of doing it and can't do it that way, like you said.
So the goal of your pattern is for your knitters to be able to use it to
Right.
reproduce your design.
Right.
So keep that in mind as you're building your pattern layout. So let's go back to simple
Well,
basics.
so just like written instructions, like we've talked about in these videos, need to be clear and accurate. The chart
Mm-hmm.
does too. So
Exactly.
there are ways to make sure that your chart is accurate and clear and
Mm-hmm.
not confusing, or there's so many different ways to add confusion to a chart.
Yes.
So the basic,
The
like, you do
basics.
need to number the rows or rounds. Not
Mm-hmm.
everybody numbers columns. You can if you want to. I do have something I want to say about column numbering in a little bit, but
I want to hear it.
so charts always begin at the bottom. That's where they worked from. And right side rows begin on the right and wrong side rows begin on the left. If it's a chart in the round, all the rounds will begin on the right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think some patterns I've done. Oh, she says, I wish more designers focused on testing through the written instructions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, especially when there's a lot of them and there's a lot going on. It's easy to have a slip up in there. That's why we go.
Typos.
That's why we go line by line with the written instructions and the chart, and we check to see that the chart in and of itself is correct, and we
Mm-hmm.
check to see that the written instructions in and of themselves are correct, and we go through them line by line
And
to
match.
make sure they're making the same thing.
And it's not our
Um,
favorite task, but we do it.
you may want to, and so back to the rounds and rows and where they begin. Some people I've noticed in recent patterns will have a little blurb at the top of the chart page, like this chart is worked from the bottom up, and the right side rows start on because not everybody knows that. If
Yes.
you don't have someone teaching you, and like again, there's more teaching in knitting patterns than there used to be. It didn't used to be like this, but now so many people are home, right? And not everybody knows how to look up things, and not everybody has someone to ask. And if you look at something in the way that we read in America, it's like, top to bottom, left to right. So not everybody always realizes that charts are read this way. So it's like a couple sentences. If you know that you have a beginner knitting audience and you know that those are the kinds of people who are buying your patterns, it might want to add a note about how the charts are meant to be worked.
So the other basic part of it is that what is symbols you use in
Right.
each cell of the chart, in each little square on the chart that represents a stitch or a group of stitches, that needs to be defined. And it needs to be defined in a key that's close by. They shouldn't have to flip through 4 or 5 pages to find the key.
I don't mean it. I know some people think it's repetitive, but I totally
I
want there to be a key on every
key
chart
right
page.
next to it, especially because when I was a beginning chart knitter, I kept having, every time I came to a particular symbol, I had to go, wait, what is that again? I had to go look at the key.
I
And
want the chart key on the same page of the chart.
And your chart key should have everything that's in the chart, and it shouldn't have extra that's not in the chart because that would confuse people.
Yes.
So for instance,
Also,
there's like right side and wrong side directions like for knit and purl, and they might be defined in the same way on the key, but maybe there is no purl in the whole pattern.
right.
So then you don't need to include that in your key because then the knitter would be like, wait, did I miss something? Am I missing what's... Don't include stuff in the key that's not in the chart.
No. And also, that goes back to making sure there's a key on each page where there's a chart. Don't just take the same key and put it on every single chart page if not all those charts have all those symbols in them.
Right.
Put the symbols that are in that particular chart on that page. And
Exactly.
so like like she was saying, the software that you use is going to generate a key for you, and it may include things like the right side, wrong side, or purling or knitting or something that you're not actually using in the chart. So you need to edit the key. Also, it may have a different, the key that's generated or the abbreviation that's used in whatever software you're making the chart in may abbreviate things differently than you have. So in your abbreviation list and in your pattern written instructions, if you use X abbreviation, then you can't just have the Y chart software abbreviation in your chart key. You have to change it. Or they're going to be like, what's that?
Right.
Yeah.
So the other thing too is if your chart can be used in both in the round and flat, you might consider putting the numbers for the rows and the rounds on both sides.
Both sides.
And then make sure you have a note to explain to your knitters how the chart is used flat and how the chart is used in the round, and make sure that your key matches for all those instructions. So sometimes that's okay, or I know some people who use both, have an in the round chart and a flat chart so that the knitters have both to work from.
And if you want to, even if you have a chart that can be worked flat or in the round, that's still going to generate two separate sets of written instructions. So you're not going to be able to just get away with one set of written instructions like you can one chart. You're going to need to write both.
Right. So the other thing is that something that we check as tech editors is that this is basic. The number of stitches that are indicated in the first row or round of your chart needs to work over whatever stitches are available. And sometimes that can be a little tricky. So double check that your beginning of your chart actually works for the number of stitches that are on the needles at the point that the chart starts. And if the chart's repeated, so like let's say you work chart rounds 1 through 20, and then you repeat 1 through 20 another 4 or 5 times, every time that you go from round 20 to round 1 again, they match. And they match not only in stitch count, but they also match in the patterning. So the patterning lines up. Ask me how I know this.
And if there are multiple charts that are worked consecutively after each other.
Right.
To get into chart B, chart A has to end up where chart B is going to begin and have the right number of stitches and have it match the pattern.
Like for instance, if you got a central double decrease line in your lace or whatever that's shown on the chart that needs to match, the pattern needs to match as it goes from chart to chart. A lot of times as a tech editor, I print up all the charts and then I tape them together to see if they work. Sometimes it's the easiest way for me to visualize it too. So that can be a way to check it yourself.
And I think something that people get mixed up on, I've noticed this a couple times. Whenever I seem to find a stitch count error going from one chart to another or going back to repeat it again, is when that last row of the previous chart has like increases or decreases in it.
Yeah.
Where that stitch on the chart has not materialized yet.
Right.
So they're counting the boxes or whatever. Right. And they think they're forgetting about whatever those increases or decreases were that are going to make the number that chart B begins on a different number.
Right. So then that brings up another issue with increases and decreases in charts. Some charting software actually will help you check it. Like if you use Stitch Mastery, there's actually a part, there's like a little box that can give you a count to make sure that your increases and decreases match from line to line. But that's also something that you can check on your own. So the way that we think about it as tech editors is we say that a chart line starts with a certain number of stitches and ends with a certain number of stitches, depending on what are the function of all those stitches, increasing or decreasing or changing or maybe even not changing.
The same way you would when you're checking written instructions.
It's the same thing. So it needs to be, your chart needs to match the stitch counts when you go from line to line and when you go from repeat to repeat.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to talk about repeats within a chart? Like how to
well,
show
I
it?
did have something to say about that with the column numbering that
Yes,
I
please.
noticed that just bugs me.
Oh, you have an opinion about this?
I have an opinion about something. So I don't have an example like right in front of me, but if you have a chart and you numbered your columns, say it's even, I mean, especially if we're talking like a lot of columns, or that the first section ends on like an odd number. I mean, if you number your columns, you're numbering the stitches in the column, and that's how people will orient themselves to your chart, and that's how they'll keep track of where they are. Right. So what I see sometimes is, say there's a repeat in the chart, the columns will be numbered in the beginning from like 1 to 12, and when they get to the repeat, they begin numbering again separately, and then the repeat is numbered 1 to 9 or whatever, and then sometimes after that repeat, they'll begin the numbering again, pick it up at 13,
Really?
or they'll start again at 1. And
I've never seen that.
I really have to suggest you don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's really confusing because this number over here is not the 13th stitch.
Right.
Right? And this repeat of the whatever columns, I get the purpose. People do it because they want to identify that the repeat is 9 stitches, right? Mm-hmm. So they want to number that repeat separately. So, but it's very confusing to have these like broken up column count, and I really suggest you don't do that. What you can do, if you want to somehow separate that repeat so people can look at it as like an independent thing, number your columns 1 through whatever, 50 or whatever, and you can put a little bracket like around the repeat and say 20 stitches, or
yes,
however many stitches it is. If you want people to realize and know it in their head, like
that
how many
the
stitches are in the
repeat's
repeat.
20.
You can indicate that without making the column numbering be like, what's happening?
Right.
So that's all I want to say about column numbering. And you don't have to number columns, like not everybody does.
No, absolutely not.
But if you do, definitely do it consecutively,
Consecutively and consistently. It seems like we're back to another C there. So the other thing I want to mention about repeats. So sometimes the shaping, especially in like lace shawls or things like that, the shaping changes. And your shaping like gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, but you don't have enough room on the page to make a chart that does that.
It sounds like you're going to give a good tip. Sounds like you're going to give a good tip right now. No pressure.
And shows, you can show in the chart if you have a certain number of repeated stitches. Once you get to a certain number, those stitches can get eaten up by the repeat. However, in other words, it kind of looks like a sawtooth, is what I've seen some of my clients do. However, you got to make sure that the stitch count actually matches. So then the stitches that are not in the repeat, like are outside the repeat, they need to match on both sides. So when you actually check your chart, make sure that the stitches on the right side of the repeat and the left side of the repeat match to go to line, not just the total number across the whole thing. Otherwise, your pattern will move.
Yeah,
I don't know if that was a great tip, but you can make a chart fit on a page, no matter how large it is, if there isn't a huge, like 50 stitch repeat. And that's where you can ask for some help from someone who has some skills with chart building or has some experience to look at it and say, how can I reduce the size of this but still make it usable for the knitters? So the other thing, always check always check, this is just a simple tech editor tip, that the chart, the stitch patterning that you've illustrated in the chart actually produces what is in your sample. Do your cables cross the right way? Is your lace decreases actually in the same place? Because sometimes, especially with those cable crosses, they can be crossed the wrong direction and then it won't make what your sample is. So double check that, because sometimes it's real easy to hit a particular symbol and then miss what actually is happening in your sample.
Well, because it gets confusing, right? If you've got,
Mm-hmm.
6 different cable stitches in one chart, and then you've
Yes.
got the different decreases in one chart, you've got a lot of lines going lots of ways, and they all kind of look the same. You have to really look closely to make sure you've got them going in the right direction and that you haven't, like you said, swapped a symbol,
So the other thing that we need to mention is that charts should, well, okay, we're not going to go should.
Don't do that.
Take that word back.
Who are we kidding? This whole thing is should. We're like, don't do that.
We're kind of the shoulds. Charts traditionally, in the general realm of the way that knitting charts have been designed in the last 20, 30, 40 odd years, and in other cultures also, have been to illustrate visually what it looks like from the public side, from the right side.
Of the knitting, right.
From the right side of the knitting, the side of the knitting that's facing the knitter, not the inside or the back side of the knitting.
Right, the chart should replicate.
Should
look like that.
It should look like that. And the reason why is that actually helps the knitters who are visual to see that their knitting matches the sample.
Well, they can see the design.
Mm-hmm.
They can see what they're doing. So oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, you finish.
So if you are a knitter who is directionally challenged, and there's a lot of us that are like that, and you prefer to write a chart that's non-traditional so that your right side is worked exactly with the stitch symbols as the knitter will work it, and then the wrong side rows, if it's worked flat, is worked exactly as the knitter works it with symbols that match, then you need to let your knitters know that this is not a traditional chart and explain how to use it. Otherwise, they're going to be confused. They're going to look at it and go, why is this stockinette fabric, but there's all these pearls on the right side? Because most chart knitters are used to it representing what the right side looks like. So if you choose in your style and in your way of doing things for describing to your knitters how to work this stitch pattern, and you do it in a non-traditional way, you got to tell people.
You do have to tell people, because what will happen is people will just do it the way they know, and they'll come up with the wrong thing.
Right.
You have to say what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Yes.
Well, I guess you don't really have to say why you're doing it. It's nobody's business.
No,
but you do have to say
it.
what you're doing.
We have our own opinion. Like, we personally think that a chart should represent the right side. However, we are not you, and it's your design and your pattern. Not my pattern.
Absolutely not.
So
I just meant you don't have to explain to people. I didn't mean that.
No
just have
excuses.
To say how to work this chart.
You got to give instructions, though, so that they're not confused and frustrated by your work. Okay, do you guys have questions for us about charts? Because we have just one more topic to cover, software. So you guys have questions about charts that we haven't covered so far in this talk, you guys can ask us in the comments. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to hear what you think about charts. Do you like charts? That was our original question. Are you a chart knitter or a written direction knitter, written instruction knitter? Oh, that was one other thing we didn't mention. Make sure that your written instructions, the rows around numbering, so like you say round 1 to round 20 of a pattern, matches the chart numbering. I've seen it where they didn't match, and then it's like a knitter who's trying to follow along might get confused if they're trying to use both at the same time. Christina says she's both. Okay, chart that represents stitch high contrast square paper. Okay, I'm not sure if I understand your question.
I don't get that.
Can you ask it again? Creative Me DK, we'd love to hear what your question is. If you could rephrase it, and we'll definitely try our best to answer it. Ruth says, I love charts. If I could get away without writing out instructions, I would. Yeah, and we did talk a little bit before you showed up, Ruth, how important it is to have written instructions if you can provide them. So then that leads us to some software to
But
help.
yeah, I mean, that would be a load off, right?
Mm-hmm.
You didn't have to write the written instructions. But that's how because that's what works for you, right? So some people would feel the same exact way about having to create a chart.
Yeah, exactly.
And something you just said made me want to say something.
Oh, what is it?
You were just talking about refresh my memory.
Row numbering,
Oh,
matching,
okay.
and written
Matching.
directions.
So sometimes what happens is there will be like row 2 in the written instructions, and it'll say row 2, knit 3, and then
Mm-hmm.
work row 7 of chart A.
Yes.
And it is confusing. The
Yeah.
trouble is you also don't want to begin a chart on like not 1,
Yeah,
right?
that's very true.
You don't want to start chart round 7. What?
Mm-hmm.
So it is kind of difficult when you have row 3 is working, row 7 of chart A. It is kind of confusing. So if you are in a position where you can't see a way out of that, and you can't see a way
Mm-hmm.
to have your instructions be clear, but the instructions in the written and the chart row numbers match, just make sure it's really clear on there when the chart's being worked and what rows are being worked, and don't, make sure those are right. Because sometimes it's hard to get out of that.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's a great point, Christina. Oh, Creative EDK asked her question in a different way. So this is such a good point. I'm so glad you brought this up. A circle is round on square paper, but not on the knitted fabric. It can cheat the knitter. This is what she meant. So the size of the cell or the square or the rhomboid, the rectangle on a knitting chart doesn't exactly match the size of a stitch. Pretend this is a stockinette stitch, a V. If you are working a color work pattern, this is such a good point. I'm so glad she brought it. I'm sorry. I'm so glad they brought it up. I'm not very good with this. The size of a stitch is always going to be a little wider than it is tall in most stitch patterning. Am I right about that? So like there's always more rows or rounds than there are stitches unless you're dealing with some types of color work. If you are designing color work, such as like stranded knitting, fair isle knitting, can you think of some other ones that are
Where
like
you'll
that?
have like the chart will be
intarsia, where it's making a picture.
right, and so the chart is the whole thing. You can't repeat the chart and start again.
Like say, for instance, you have an intarsia chart or a color work chart depicting a kitty cat. If you do it on regular square and you draw it on regular graph paper square, your kitty cat actually will be shorter when it gets knit up. There's distortion if you use square graph paper. So my suggestion is if you're depicting a picture on your knitting, any kind of picture knitting, you're going to want to use knitting graph paper, which you actually can print for free online if you do a Google search of free knitting graph paper printable. And if you're using software, some software will actually do a 2:3 ratio or a 4:7 or whatever your stitch gauge ratio. You can actually make the chart squares or cells the same shape as according to your gauge, the ratio according to your gauge. So I highly recommend doing that if you're doing anything related to picture knitting. Did I get that right? Oh, please tell me I answered your question, or the point that you were trying to make was so good that we covered that. Anything else?
That's how I took what she was asking or saying.
Yeah. Okay, so the last thing we wanted to talk about was software. Christina, what was the question that you got?
The question was, what free software is out there for creating charts for knitting and crochet?
Mm-hmm.
So crochet is such a different beast of a chart than knitting charts.
And we don't have
I don't
any
know anything
experience with
about
that.
And I don't know anything about that. If anyone in here is a crochet designer and knows, softwares that are free for creating crochet charts, please drop them in the comments. That would be
Yes,
awesome because
please.
that's not something we know about.
Mm-hmm.
Stitch Fiddle was the one I used to use a lot. It's free software for your computer.
Right.
Not
I made a list.
And you found some that you can also use on your phone and tablet.
Yeah, so Knitbird is one. Pattern Genius is another. I think Chartminder might be free to start. I'm not sure if there's a certain amount. Like I know with Pattern Genius that I use on my iPad for smaller charts, it's like you can do up to a certain number of cells and then you need to pay. Oh, Kate says Stitchboard. Is that for crochet charts? Stitchboard. I'm gonna look that up. I need to learn how to read crochet charts. That's kind of on my goals for this year too. Goody Two Sticks said stranded designs with strong diagonals usually work up with the same number of rows as stitches per inch. Yeah, and exactly, stranded designs is where I've seen where the stitch and the row gauge match. Okay, Stitch Board. Anybody else have free or even paid crochet chart software that we can help answer this question?
Knit and Knot says, I use Chartminder. They are free but have extra features for a small price. That's what I thought, that
Yeah,
there's a
Chartminder
basic
is
thing you
good.
can use for free. Um,
So do a
and
Google search for free knitting chart software. I think you'll be able to find a lot more than even we can tell you here.
Well, and I work with designers who make their charts in Excel or make their charts in whatever design
Yes.
software that they write their pattern in.
Yes. So you
Whatever
can,
design software they use to write their pattern, that's where they make their charts. Some people make charts in Excel.
right.
Some people obviously use all these softwares, but not even everybody does that.
So
And
there
there are
are,
symbols you can get online, free knitting
yes,
symbols, chart symbols that you can just Google and get and use in your
soft into your
charts.
spreadsheets. Yeah, you just make a spreadsheet and turn that into a chart. You will need to have it checked though to make sure it's accurate if you are doing it that way, since there's no cross check in that software.
Well, okay, but I would suggest, even if you're making a chart in charting software, that you get it checked, because lots of times there's sort of some quirky little thing that totally works in the pattern and is totally
Mm-hmm.
correct, and the chart software flags it as wrong.
Yeah, that's
It
true.
happens all the time.
That's a good
The
point.
chart software might flag something right because it ends up in the right number of stitches and starts in the right number
Mm-hmm.
of stitches, but it might not be what you intended and you might have missed something.
Exactly.
Always have your charts checked, please. But
Yes.
I guess we think that about all
Everything.
pattern stuff, right?
Because we're tech editors and that's what we do for a living is we want your stuff to be right, so send it to a tech editor to get checked.
One of Kate's Stitchboard is free, can chart beading, crochet, cross stitch, and knitting. Oh, that's a good one to
Ooh,
know then.
cross stitch.
And there are features you can pay for also.
Stitchboard.
So
Okay, I'm gonna look that
Stitchboard,
up.
beading, crochet, cross stitch, knitting. Stitchboard.
Okay, so it is worthwhile to mention those that may have a free trial, but then you pay to have the full software. Entwined is one that some people do use. Invisoknits, I think it's Invisoknits. Is that it? Have you heard of
I
that
don't
one?
know that. Nope, never heard
Okay,
of it.
the other one that shameless plug. I love Stitch Mastery. So Stitch Mastery.
Same.
Stitch Mastery changed the way that I interacted with charts, understood charts, was able to edit charts and design charts. So just full disclosure is that they did pay me for an interview on their blog. So I guess I'm really a super fan of Stitch Mastery. They do make it easy to do large charts, to duplicate charts, and they're to export written directions in your own style. And you can even type in written directions and it will generate the chart for you.
And you can
So,
create your own stitches and
mm-hmm,
you can
customized stitches.
check things a little simpler.
Mm-hmm,
I didn't have it for a really long time. Like, I only got it in the
right.
last year because I could not, I mean, I really couldn't at all, but I got it because I think it's worth it. It's really worth it to me
Well, it
to
paid
have
for
it.
itself for me pretty quick.
I agree.
So
It's really been
what
worth it for me.
you may have to, if you're interested in trying Stitch Mastery, they do have a free version that you can play around with. So I'm all for stitch mastery. Just say that. Do you guys have any questions for us about software, or about symbols, maybe, or other things about charts? We'd love to answer your questions during this time if we can. If we didn't answer your question and you're watching this on the replay on IGTV, feel free to send us a direct message or to ask a question on one of our other posts, and we'll be sure to answer it for you. Charts can take, really nice knitting charts can take your patterns from okay to super professional, just because they will reach a larger audience. And a lot of us knitters are very visual and we love working from charts. The other thing that I wanted to mention is there is a history of chart knitting in Eastern European knitting, and they may use different symbols and different ways of depicting the knitting charts, and that's totally fine. If you come from that culture and it's how you learn to knit and you want to use that to use that type of charting, feel free to do it. Just make sure that you explain to your knitters what you're doing and what things mean.
Well, this is where the chart key is fantastic,
The chart
right?
key is everything.
Use any symbol you want, as
Yes.
long as it's in the chart key and it says what it is.
Is there a kind, Creative Media K asks, is there a kind of master at the keys in the chart? Like, is there one kind of symbol for, I'm not sure if your question is
I'm not sure
is
what
there,
you mean. Like, is there a default for all the symbols? So, like, is there?
yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if this is what your question is, but there is two generally different kinds of charts. There's ones that use a dot for purl and a blank space for knit. And then there's another kind of chart that uses a straight up and down line for knit and a vertical line for knit and a horizontal line for purl. And then there's other symbols that generally cross all different kinds of charting software and use the same type of thing.
But I've seen all kinds of symbols for the same thing.
Yeah, there's all kinds of symbols.
You know, and partly because people who are doing it, like we said, in Excel or in InDesign or whatever their design software is, sometimes they're making up their own symbols. Sometimes
Right.
found it from one place, found it from a different place. And all these softwares maybe are going to have basic stuff that's the same, but other things, they might be different. That's why that chart key is so important. You got to write down what those symbols mean.
You all recommend Craft Yarn Council for continuity? Do you mean for consistency and symbols? They
I don't know
do
what you
have
mean by continuity.
probably in symbol.
I wish there would be a standard with a standard font. I know, but there's just so many different ways to interpret things and so many different ways that people visualize things,
To draw
I don't
things.
think there's a way to, yes, that's what she means, consistency. Do you all recommend Craft Yarn Council for?
So Craft Yarn Council does have a list of standard, quote unquote, standard abbreviations and symbols for those abbreviations for the types of stitch functions that we do on the needles. And yeah, it's a great place to start. It's not a constraint. In other words, this is not like the Webster's Dictionary where you have to follow it. If you find that you do not like the symbol that they use for whatever stitch, of course you can. You can use a different or even design your own custom symbol if you want. As long as it's consistent through your whole pattern and it's in the key, it's good to use. Father Fibers says CYC needs to publish a font. The problem is that not every font is going to meet every pattern's needs in layout or in formatting. It would be nice to have, for accessibility reasons, a certain size would be great. Or if you're trying to get a lot of information on one page, have it so if it's a digital copy so that it's easy to zoom in or to make into more than one page.
Yeah, because some of these charts can be really unwieldy. I mean, this one I've been working on, it's like good gravy. It's like 90 columns, and that makes those boxes really tiny and not always super easy to read. So being able to blow them up and have them still be readable is really valuable.
I have had some clients who, if they have a chart that's unwieldy and large, they will break it out into
Mm,
more than one page that the knitter then can paste together if they
hmm.
print it. Oh, that brings up another point. Not to dismiss you, Father Fiber, I keep asking us the questions that you have, and we'll do our best to answer them. If you choose a color in your chart, make sure that that color is not going to bleed into all the other colors if it's in grayscale. So some people print on a laser printer that doesn't have any colors. And if they do that, will the chart even look, will it all be a wash of one tone of gray? So keep that in mind.
I
Sometimes
really
it's,
struggle with colors and charts because
mm-hmm,
I think they can. I just this morning was proofing a pattern with colors and charts, and I went back and forth in my head about whether to say something because they are so useful. There's so many
mm-hmm,
different ways to use color and chart that can be so helpful and such an aid in reading them clearly and being able to do all kinds of things within one chart and make it be
right.
clear for everybody. I mean, they're so useful. But,
Yes.
I don't always have color ink. And probably I'm not the only one in the world. Or
Mm-hmm,
like you said, not all printers even have color ink.
right.
So it's tricky because you don't want to put something in there that's going to
Mm-hmm,
make it so the person can't even tell what you're talking about when they print the pattern.
right.
So the benefit to that is that it is in its original format a digital pattern. So like the person could go look at it on their screen and
Right.
add that color themselves or make it designated some kind of way for themselves on their paper. But it's like an extra step the knitter has to do.
Exactly.
But color really is, I go back and forth because it really is so useful, but it doesn't always
Mm-hmm.
print out and show what you need.
Yeah, exactly. So it's the simpler the better. It is with all charts. Don't overcomplicate things if you don't have to. Just to convey the information as best as you can with the simplest information is always a good rule of thumb. Father Fiber says mine are all 70 to 300 plus. Oh, I think you might mean pixel size. For when you put in a chart into format, a lot of times the chart can be pixelated too. So make sure when you actually are proofing your final format of your pattern, make sure the chart is, if they zoom in, it's not going to go into little pixels. And I think, oh, columns, 70 to 300. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that is, pixel size is important for digital patterns. I think a standard export pixel size is like 300, but it can be even less than that. It could be 100 if you don't have a super large chart. 370 to 300 plus columns. How do you handle that many columns in a pattern that is multiple pages? Do you split it up into different pages? Yeah, that can be really tricky, especially if you're including written directions too.
Mm.
So that sounds like a super challenge for pattern writing. All
Yeah,
power
I'd be
to you.
curious what you do, how you do that, how you lay it out in the pattern on the pages as
Yeah,
far as using it from a paper.
yeah, exactly. Do you guys have
Um,
any questions for us? We're about ready to wrap it up. We're at the 50-minute mark for this talk. We've talked a lot. Obviously, we have a lot of things to say about charts. Do
I
you have
did
anything
want to,
else?
well, we did want to say one thing just generally about our videos we've been doing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
in these videos we've been doing, and now at least we've been able to save them. We
Yeah,
mean to
finally.
be helpful and useful to you. That's
Mm-hmm.
our goal. That's what we're trying to do, is to be helpful and useful to you. So if you find that these videos have not been helpful at all, let
Let
us
us
know,
know.
because we don't want to just be coming on here taking up time that people could be doing something that would be useful. So
Right.
if this has not been helpful, let us know. We don't want to do it if it's not helping anyone. Do you know what I mean?
And if
So,
it has been helpful to us, please let us know.
yeah.
And let us know what kind of things you really struggle with in your pattern writing that we can help you with. I think between the two of us, we probably have edited more than 1,500 patterns,
Oh, yeah.
at least. I know I've edited more than 600.
Mm.
So I think we've seen a lot of patterns come across our desk. The things that we're talking about in the IG lives are things that we've come across in our tech editing and that we would like to convey to you to help you overcome some issues that we see commonly happen. So if there's something particular that you'd like a topic for us to discuss in the coming weeks, please do ask us and we'll be sure to consider it.
If
Sarah,
there's any, oh, she
go
says,
ahead.
Sarah, this is a different type of chart entirely, but could you talk about the chart you posted on IG yesterday?
Yeah, sure, no problem. Do you know any Canadian tech editors? Yes.
Yeah.
Uh, I think there's some who might still be hanging around here, just being
So
just
raise your
being here.
hand. And
Yeah, raise your hands. If you guys are in the audience right now and you are a Canadian tech editor, go ahead and put yourself in the comments. I do know a few. Kate, I can send you a message or I can put it into the comments.
comments.
There's quite a few that we know.
And in the Tech Editor Hub, if you
Oh,
ask
yes.
someone who's local to you in Canada, they will answer you.
Yes. Oh, I'm glad it's a help to you, Christina. Okay, so let's talk about the chart that I posted on Instagram yesterday. That is something that I hand drew myself on a piece of graph paper, and it is a single pencil outline of the front of a cardigan, one side of the front of a cardigan. And what I did was I annotated it with stitch counts and row numbers so that I knew exactly what row numbers all of the decreases would happen on and all the shaping would happen on for the bind offs and to get to a particular stitch count at the top shoulder, working from the bottom up. This is a method that machine knitters use where they plan their projects this way, and that actually piece of paper is posted above my knitting machine. It's for a machine knitting project. But I do this also with hand knitting. One of the best, this is like a tip that I read in a book by Catherine Lowe called The Raveled Sleeve. And basically what you do is you map out your entire knitted piece, whether it be a sleeve, a back, a front, and you draw it out and you write, and oh, I've seen this also on Knitty. For 2006, they had a whole article on how to do this, where you write out all that's going to happen. You basically make yourself a roadmap on a piece of graph paper or a sheet of paper or in a notebook. And this helps you to visualize what's happening when, but you also do it according to your gauge. So if you don't get the pattern's gauge, then you make all these calculations of what's going to happen on what row according to your gauge so that you never have to knit to a measurement. Because
I make
of
those
course,
notes right in the pattern.
Yeah, and
About
people
what
can do
rows
it in
I'm
the
going to.
patterns and you don't have to do it on a separate piece of paper. The key is to do it so that you're doing it according to your knitting gauge and not so that when it's blocked, the thing actually works according to what it's supposed to. So that's what I posted yesterday, which is my own little doodle to how I map out my knitting. Father Fiber, I make my own charts 5 times the final size to cut down on pixelization. That's a really smart tip. Yeah, wow, 5 times the final size. So then you break it out into different sections for each part. I'm trying to visualize how it would do it. Do you know of any other? I don't see anybody chiming in to be a Canadian tech editor. Is Josephine still here? Although I don't know if she's taking on. I don't know if she's taking on new tech editing clients. Kate, I would say please go to the Tech Editor Hub. It's a free group on Facebook, and you can post there if someone has a need for a particular local tech editor that they want to hire someone within their own country or their own locality, then you can post there and people who are available will reply to your comments. There's actually a lot of us.
Good. Yeah, people are very good at responding. I'm sure you'd get answers.
Amy says, I want to try this method. I hope you do. It actually helps you to understand your knitting. And I learned to do this a lot when I was exploring Japanese knitting and also exploring knitting machine, how they describe knitting machine knitting. It takes you outside of the realm of being just a blind follower of a pattern and actually makes you interact and understand your pattern better.
And make it make sure it's going to work out for you.
Yeah, it's going to actually work before you're actually having to knit the whole thing and then find out it doesn't work. Do you guys have any more questions for us? I think we're just about ready to wrap it up. I'm going to run out of battery here in a minute. All right.
I don't see any more questions.
I don't see any more questions. Feel free to message us at all this week if you have something in particular that you would like us to talk about in the coming weeks. We'd love to know if our talks are helpful to you, and if what we've already recorded is a resource to you guys. These Mondays are very good. Learn lots and get things repeated. Oh, that's good. We don't mind. We probably will repeat ourselves a little bit in the coming weeks because we didn't have a chance to save all of our recordings from the future or in the past. We're going to
talk about some things we already talked about, and consolidate a little bit.
But sometimes we learn when things are repeated even better. So
I do.
I do too. Thank you guys for joining us. We love seeing you guys on Monday mornings. This really does make our day. It gets us going for the week, and we hope it gets your week going well too.
It's like the only time of the day that my kids listen to me when I tell them that I'm working and you can't bug me. All the rest of the day they don't listen, but because I'm like on video and it's like a live thing, they totally
stay out of your hair.
But the rest of the day, forget it. Oh, finding this very helpful.
Thanks,
You're
Christina.
helpful. Thanks. You're the best. Oh, thanks, you guys. That's awesome. Good to know. Really glad to know.
We really appreciate you guys being here with us and asking us questions and just listening to us ramble about all things tech. We're kind of nerdy that way.
Goal is to be helpful.
So we'll see you guys again next Monday. I'm not sure what we're going to talk about, but follow us along in our feeds and we'll keep you updated as we decide.
We'll get it out there.
Have a great week.
Bye, guys.
Take care of yourselves.